Why did no one notice the quiet figure moving across the armory floor? The mop slid in steady arcs, her boots silent against the concrete. Marines hurried past. Navy SEALs checked gear lists, but none looked twice at the woman pushing a bucket as though she were part of the furniture. Only one man watched. His eyes didn't miss much. He was a SEAL chief who had seen more war than most in this room could imagine, and something about her carried the weight of battle, though she hid it well. Riley Montgomery kept her head down. The armory smelled of oil, dust, and steel. She preferred mornings when the light came through tall windows, long shadows stretching across the polished floor she tried to keep spotless. It wasn't glamorous work. It wasn't the work she once dreamed of when she raised her hand and swore an oath. But it was the work she had been given, and she took it seriously. Service was service, even when no one clapped for it. Still, the silence hurt. The patches had faded on her sleeve. The decorations were tucked away in a drawer she almost never opened. Outwardly, she was invisible. Inside, she carried memories no mop could wash away. Sometimes, as she wrung water from gray strings, she could still smell the dust of Helmand Province, still hear the metallic crack of bullets snapping against armored vehicles. The mind doesn't forget the moments it nearly died. She paused, leaning on the mop handle as Marines filed past. None noticed the Purple Heart citation folded neatly in her back pocket. She carried it not to boast, but as a reminder that the blood she spilled, the lives she saved, were real, that her service hadn't been a dream. Yet here, in Camp's armory, she might as well have been a ghost. Her grandfather's voice echoed faintly in her mind. He had come back from Vietnam with haunted eyes, yet he always told her the core was family. Brotherhood, sacrifice, she believed him. She believed so deeply that at 17 she signed the papers before her parents could even argue. Her grandfather shook her hand like she had done something noble. Her mother cried. Riley thought she understood what she was stepping into. She hadn't. No one really does. A clipboard smacked against metal, jolting her back to the present. The supply clerk at the counter, Sergeant Davis, was already in a foul mood. His eyes landed on her, narrowing with the kind of disdain she had grown used to. She ignored it, mopping closer to the desk, waiting for her moment. She had filled out the request form last night, same as always. A few bottles of disinfectant, rags, floor wax. The kind of supplies no one thinks about until they're gone. She carried the form with the same steadiness. She once carried a medical kit into a firefight. When the line thinned, she stepped forward. "Morning, Sergeant. I've got a requisition here." Davis barely glanced at her. His voice came out in a drawl meant for an audience. "Why don't you get a real Marine to sign this for you, sweetheart?" The words landed harder than a bullet. They were casual to him. To her, they reopened every wound she tried to bandage in silence. The air shifted. Marines nearby slowed their work. A couple SEALs, running through their checklist, looked up. Riley kept her face still, her voice calm. "I am a Marine. The authorization is valid." He smirked, scanning the paper slowly, deliberately, like he wanted to stretch out her humiliation. "Darling, pushing a mop doesn't make you a warrior. Maybe you should stick to women's work. Laundry, chow hall, something you can handle." Her grip on the counter tightened. White knuckles. A storm rising in her chest, colliding emotions, anger, shame, disbelief. She wanted to shout. Wanted to tell him about the bodies she pulled from the kill zone. About the blood soaking her uniform as she pressed gauze against wounds too deep for one pair of hands. About the bronze star pinned to her chest while she was still bandaged. Instead, she stood silent. Her tongue refused to betray her dignity. Around them, the room grew still. Conversations died. Boots scuffed uneasily, but no one stepped forward. That was the cut. The silence of brothers in arms who knew better, who looked away because it was easier. Riley's eyes burned, but she would not let tears fall here. Not for him, not for anyone. The SEAL chief watched from the far end of the counter. His jaw tightened. Years of combat had taught him when something was wrong, when a moment mattered more than it looked. His hand flexed by his side, fighting the instinct to act. It wasn't his fight, yet, but his eyes never left Riley. Davis's voice grew louder, mocking. "See, boys, this is what happens when we confuse service with support. She thinks she's one of us. Cute, isn't it? His laughter ricocheted off the steel racks like shrapnel. A couple Marines smirked nervously, ashamed of themselves even as they did it. Riley heard none of them. Her mind had gone back. Helmet, dust in her teeth, her ribs on fire from shrapnel, crawling through dirt while rounds cracked inches from her head. She remembered the weight of another Marine's body as she dragged him by his flak vest, blood soaking her gloves, praying he would make it. She remembered thinking she might not see another sunrise. Yet she crawled out again. And again. 4 lives pulled from death's grip in under an hour. The official report said 47 minutes. To her, it was a lifetime. Her eyes refocused on Davis. This man knew nothing. Nothing of war, nothing of sacrifice. His words were paper cuts compared to enemy fire, but somehow they cut deeper. Because here in her own house among her own brothers she was being erased. He tore the requisition form in half. Then again. Shreds floated down like ashes at her boots. Find another way to keep busy, Corporal. We don't have time for games. The silence thickened. Shame hung heavy in the air. Still no one moved. The bystander effect wrapped around her like a cage. Riley stood, fists at her side. She wanted to scream, but instead she swallowed, tasting the bitter metallic tang of restraint. In her back pocket, the Purple Heart citation pressed against her skin, reminding her who she was, even if no one else saw it. Stepped forward then, slow, deliberate, his boots echoing across the polished floor. Heads turned, the armory hushed. He didn't speak right away. He bent, collecting the torn pieces of paper from the floor with care, piecing them together like something sacred. Davis opened his mouth, ready to protest, but the SEAL's gaze froze him in place. Cold, unblinking. The kind of stare only a man who had walked through hell could give. When finally spoke, his voice was low, steady. Do you know who you just dismissed, Sergeant? Every syllable carried weight. Do you know what she's done? Davis blinked, caught between arrogance and fear. He muttered something about paperwork, cut him off with a sharper tone audible across the room. You just mocked a Marine who crawled through enemy fire with shrapnel in her body, who pulled 4 men back from death, who bled for the same flag you wear on your sleeve. He let that hang, each word striking like hammer blows. She wears no medals now because she doesn't need to. Her service record is etched in scars. A ripple went through the room. Marines shifted, shame crawling up their spines. The SEALs exchanged glances, silent but attentive. Davis paled, his smirk evaporating. Did something no one expected. He unclipped his rifle from his sling. The weapon was clean, oiled, ready, a SEAL's lifeline. He held it out, offering it to Riley with both hands. The gesture was quiet, but it thundered louder than any insult. A warrior of her caliber deserves this more than I do, not a mop. The air froze. In military culture, a rifle is sacred, never surrendered lightly. To hand it to another is to acknowledge them as equal, sometimes more. Gasps whispered through the room. Riley's breath caught. Her hands trembled as she accepted it, not from weakness but from the tidal wave of recognition she hadn't felt in months. The weight was familiar. Heavy, yes, but it carried belonging. For the first time since Hellman, she felt seen, not as a janitor, not as a forgotten file in a drawer, as a Marine. Around them, silence broke into murmurs of apology, shame, realization. A few Marines stepped forward, unable to meet her eyes but muttering quiet words. Sorry, Corporal. Didn't know. Shouldn't have stood by. Davis shrank behind the counter, his authority dissolving into nothing. Riley looked at. His eyes held no pity, only respect. The kind that can't be faked. She nodded once, unable to form words. The rifle weighed heavy in her arms, but inside, a lighter weight had been lifted. The moment would ripple outward. The base would talk about it by sundown. Leadership would ask questions. Things would change. But right here, right now, all that mattered was this. Someone had remembered who she was. Someone had spoken when silence reigned. And for the first time in months, Riley felt her heart beat with purpose again. But she didn't yet know. This was only the beginning. Why did the room stay so quiet, even after the rifle had changed hands? It wasn't silence anymore. It was the sound of people realizing they had failed someone who had once carried them, the kind of silence that sticks to the skin. Riley stood still, clutching the weapon, her breath unsteady. She hadn't expected rescue. She hadn't expected recognition. She certainly hadn't expected a Navy SEAL to step forward when her own brothers had stood back. She wanted to speak, to tell them she didn't need pity, only respect, but her throat closed. Words weren't enough anymore. She had given enough words to the wind, whispered to herself in lonely barracks rooms at night, convincing herself she still mattered. No, what mattered now was the way her chest swelled, the way her heartbeat drummed out a truth she'd nearly forgotten. She was still a Marine. His voice broke the silence. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. You all heard it. You all saw it. Remember this moment. His gaze swept across the room, pinning Marines in place. Courage doesn't always wear medals. Sometimes it carries a mop. Sometimes it gets ignored until someone decides not to look away. The shame deepened. Some of the younger Marines lowered their heads. Others shuffled their boots like caught in a lie. Davis said nothing. His hands shook as he fumbled for another requisition sheet, trying to piece together some scrap of dignity. But nothing could erase what everyone had witnessed. He had torn up more than paper that morning. He had shredded trust, honor, the unspoken promise Marines owe each other. Riley exhaled slowly, her grip loosening on the rifle. She knew she couldn't keep it. It wasn't hers. It never could be. But for one breath, one heartbeat, it reminded her of who she had been, who she still was. That mattered more than ownership. She held it close, then offered it back too. Her voice was quiet, steady despite the tremor beneath it. I don't need your rifle, Chief. I just need them to remember I still belong. Studied her, then nodded, accepting the weapon but not diminishing her words. Then let this moment do the remembering. Applause would have ruined it. Pity would have poisoned it. Instead, the room remained heavy, respectful. And when Riley turned back to her mop and bucket, the Marine stepped aside, parting like a quiet guard of honor. She walked past them with her chin high. She had entered invisible. She left carrying the invisible weight of something greater, vindication. Vindication does not erase pain. That night, alone in her small barracks room, she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the Purple Heart citation she had unfolded again. The words blurred in her vision, not from dust, but from the tears she had held back all day. She wasn't crying for Davis's insults. Those were shallow compared to the battles she had survived. She was crying for the silence of the others. The way their eyes had slid past her, the way their boots had stayed planted when they should have moved. In war, silence kills. Out here it erodes the soul. She wiped her face and leaned back against the wall. The hum of the fluorescent light filled the room, steady and cold. Her body ached not from combat but from carrying the weight of invisibility for so long. She had saved lives, but who had saved hers? She thought about Afghanistan again. The smell of cordite, the screams, the desperate grip of a Marine whose blood covered her hands. She had promised him he'd see his family again. And he did. She had kept that promise. But who had promised her she wouldn't spend the rest of her life unseen? Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A familiar voice came through, gravelly but warm. Montgomery, damn, is it really you? It was Sergeant Collins, her old squad leader from Helmand. He had heard. Word had already spread. Heard what happened today, had to call. Kid, you were always tougher than half the men I led. Don't let one idiot make you forget that. Her throat tightened. She hadn't spoken to Collins in months. He had retired, moved back to Texas. It's not just one idiot, she whispered. It's the silence. It's all of it. Collins paused. She could picture him, hand rubbing the back of his neck the way he always did when he didn't know what to say. Yeah, I know, but silence can be broken. And you broke it today even if you didn't mean to. Hold on to that. People saw. They'll remember. Hell, I remember. You saved me too, Riley. Don't think I forgot. The call ended with quiet encouragement, but the words lingered long after. Someone had remembered. Someone had seen her when the world didn't. She lay back, staring at the ceiling until exhaustion dragged her under. The next morning, whispers followed her through the chow hall. Conversations hushed when she walked past. Some eyes held shame, others curiosity, a few admiration. She ate quickly, head down, not wanting to be a spectacle. Yet she could feel it, the story spreading, reshaping how people looked at her. It was uncomfortable, but it was also a kind of justice. By afternoon, her commanding officer called her in. Captain was a stern man, not prone to smiles. He motioned for her to sit, then studied her for a long moment. "Corporal Montgomery, I've been briefed about yesterday's incident." She stiffened. "Sir, I wasn't." He raised a hand. "At ease. I'm not here to reprimand you. In fact, I've been reminded of something I should never have forgotten." He leaned forward, voice softening just slightly. "Your record, your sacrifices. The Corps owes you better than what you've been given." She swallowed hard, unsure what to say, continued. "You've been wasted on maintenance duty. That changes now. We're moving you to training, combat medicine. Recruits need to learn from someone who's been there, someone who knows what it means to bleed for their brothers." Her heart pounded. For months she had told herself she was fine, that pushing a mop was still service. But deep down she had felt herself withering. This was breath in her lungs again. Purpose. "Yes, sir," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. Studied her a moment longer. "Don't mistake this for sympathy. This is recognition. You've earned it." Recognition. The word sank deep. She saluted, left his office, and stepped outside into the late afternoon sun. For the first time in months, the light felt warm instead of harsh. The base still buzzed with its routines, Marines shouting cadence, vehicles rumbling, flags snapping in the wind. But for Riley, the world looked sharper. She belonged again, not because someone gave her permission, but because she had never stopped belonging. She had just needed someone to remind her. That night she returned to her room and pulled out a notebook. She hadn't written in it since Afghanistan. Pages filled with half-finished thoughts, sketches of faces she never wanted to forget. She picked up her pen and wrote, "Today, someone remembered. Today, silence broke." She closed the notebook and placed it on her nightstand, a small act of reclaiming her voice. But as she turned off the light, a thought lingered, heavy and unresolved. The Armory moment had changed things, yes, but change is fragile, culture is stubborn. Respect, once lost, doesn't come back in a day. She knew Davis wasn't the only one who thought less of her. She knew whispers would continue. She knew the silence would creep back if no one else had the courage to speak. The fight wasn't over. It had just shifted. She rolled onto her side, staring into the dark. Tomorrow she would walk into the training field and face fresh recruits. Tomorrow she would be the teacher instead of the forgotten. But tonight, she let the silence wash over her, not as an enemy, but as a reminder. Because silence can be broken. Why did her boots feel heavier as she crossed the training field? The sun was bright, the air sharp, and the voices of fresh recruits carried on the wind. They were lined up in rows, nervous energy radiating from their rigid stances. Some looked too young, their faces still carrying the roundness of teenagers who hadn't yet been tested. Others held that desperate hunger to prove themselves, to belong to something bigger. Riley knew both feelings. She remembered standing in their place once, heart hammering, trying not to show fear. And now, years later, here she was, the instructor they were told to listen to. But what would they see when they looked at her? A woman who pushed a mop in the Armory, or a Marine who had crawled through fire and brought men back alive? She didn't know. Her stomach twisted with the old, familiar ache of invisibility. Recognition might have come yesterday, but doubt clung like a shadow. Captain had been clear. "They need you, Montgomery. Teach them what the manuals can't." But she doubted her own voice. Would it carry enough weight? Would they hear her? She took her place in front of them. The chatter died. Dozens of young eyes locked onto her. She stood, chest rising, and let the silence settle before she spoke. "My name is Corporal Riley Montgomery. You don't know me yet. That's fine. What matters is this. If you ever find yourself in combat, what I'm about to teach you could be the difference between walking off the field or never going home." No theatrics, no bravado, just steady truth. She saw their postures shift, the reality of her words sinking in. She didn't need to convince them with medals. The gravity in her tone was enough. She knelt, setting a field medical kit on the ground. Her hands were sure practiced, though her heart beat fast. She pulled out tourniquets, gauze, pressure dressings, simple tools that became lifelines when the world turned red. "Some of you think bravery is pulling a trigger," she said quietly. "Sometimes bravery is holding pressure on a wound for 15 minutes while bullets crack around you. Sometimes it's crawling toward the sound of screaming when every instinct tells you to hide." Their faces shifted. Some leaned forward, others swallowed hard. She knew what they were picturing. She didn't soften it. War wasn't meant to be softened. She showed them how to stop a bleed, how to improvise when supplies ran out, how to ignore your own pain long enough to save someone else. And with each motion, each explanation, memories crept in. The weight of another Marine's body on her shoulders, the copper smell of blood, the thud of rounds striking dirt, her ribs burning with shrapnel. She taught through those memories, not around them. The scars guided her hands. But part of her still trembled. Not outwardly, the recruits didn't see it. Inside, though, every instruction tugged her closer to memories she hadn't fully faced. Her breath caught once mid-sentence when she remembered the fourth Marine she had dragged from the kill zone. He hadn't made it. His eyes had locked on hers as life slipped away, and she had whispered promises she couldn't keep. That ghost lingered in her chest, heavy even now. She cleared her throat, pushing through. The recruits didn't need her ghosts, they needed her lessons. "You'll be told to fight. But remember this, saving your brothers and sisters is the highest form of courage you'll ever know." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, but she let it stand. Truth didn't need to be polished. When training ended, the recruits filed off, murmuring to each other. Some glanced back at her with eyes that held respect. Real respect, not the shallow kind. Riley gathered her kit, feeling the sun heavy on her shoulders. It had gone better than she expected. Yet the doubt didn't vanish. It clung. Would they still see her as a mop pusher when rumors reached them? Or would they see her as the woman who had just taught them how to save a life? She didn't know, and maybe she never would. That evening she found herself walking toward the armory again. Not to mop, not to request supplies, just to see it. The place where everything had shifted. The echo of Davis's words still hung in the air for her, even if he had been pulled into counseling by leadership. The humiliation still lived in her bones, but so did its gesture. She stood at the threshold, the smell of oil and dust filling her lungs, and closed her eyes. That day had broken something, but it had also rebuilt something new. Appeared then, almost like he had been waiting. His steps were quiet, but his presence carried weight. He stopped beside her, arms crossed, watching the same space. Neither spoke for a long moment. Finally, he said, "How was your first day?" She glanced at him, surprised. "Better than I thought." A pause. "Harder than I thought." He nodded like he understood more than her words. "It's always harder. Teaching means reliving. Doesn't get easier, but it matters." She wanted to ask why he had stepped in that day, why he had chosen to risk respect among his peers for her. Instead, she asked, "Do you ever feel like you're two people? The one in uniform and the one everyone thinks you are?" Let out a breath, low, almost a laugh without humor. "Every day. Out there, you're stripped to the truth. In here, people see what they want. Sometimes that's a warrior, sometimes it's a janitor. The trick is not to let their version of you replace your own." His words sank deep, unsettling and comforting at once. She looked at him, really looked. The lines around his eyes, the wear of deployments etched into his face. He carried his ghosts too, and maybe that was why he had seen hers when no one else did. Before she could respond, voices echoed down the corridor. A group of Marines laughing too loud, rough around the edges. They noticed her standing there. Their laughter faltered. One muttered something under his breath, words she didn't catch but tones she recognized. Head turned sharply, eyes narrowing. The Marines fell silent, shifting awkwardly before moving on. Riley's chest tightened, shame threatening to claw its way back. Said nothing, but his hand flexed at his side, the urge to act barely restrained. She whispered, "It never ends, does it?" He shook his head slowly. "No, but neither does the fight to change it." That night, alone again in her room, she replayed the day. The recruits' eyes, words, the murmured disrespect in the hallway. It all twisted together into a knot she couldn't untangle. She wanted to believe she was moving forward, but moving forward meant carrying the past with her. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, studying the faint scar along her ribs, the one no uniform could hide from herself. She touched it lightly, remembering the heat of that day in Afghanistan. She whispered to the reflection, "You're still here. That has to mean something." Her phone buzzed again. Another old comrade. Word was spreading further than she realized. Each call reminded her she wasn't invisible to everyone, that maybe, just maybe, her story still mattered. She listened, nodded, said little. When the calls ended, the silence in her room didn't feel as crushing. It felt like space, space she hadn't had before. As she lay down, the words of the day circled in her mind. Saving your brothers and sisters is the highest form of courage. She had told the recruits that, but maybe it wasn't just for them. Maybe it was for her too. Maybe courage now meant saving herself, from silence, from erasure, from the ghosts that tried to claim her. The fight wasn't over, it was just changing shape. Why did the whispers sting more than the shrapnel ever had? She could hear them even when she pretended not to, low voices in the chow hall, muttered comments as she passed, half-finished jokes cut short when she entered a room. They thought she didn't hear, but she did. She always did, and each word carried the same blade as Davis's sneer that morning in the armory. Some of the recruits respected her. She could see it in their eyes during training, the way they leaned in when she spoke, the way their questions carried genuine hunger, but others weren't sure. They had heard the stories, the mop, the humiliation, the Navy SEAL who had stepped in because no one else had. And for some, that story overshadowed the truth of what she had actually done in Afghanistan. To them, she was both a legend and a question mark. Riley felt it in every glance, every pause. It ate at her. She walked onto the training field again, the morning sun already hot, dust swirling in small clouds beneath boots. Today was field simulation. She would show them what chaos felt like. She scattered dummies across the range, some bleeding, some unconscious, some screaming through pre-recorded speakers hidden in their mouths. She had designed it carefully. Too carefully, maybe. Because as soon as the first smoke grenade popped and the recruits rushed forward, the sound, the smell, the sight, her chest locked. Hellman came back all at once. The acrid sting of burning fuel, the pounding of machine gun fire, the desperate cries of men who couldn't move. Her hands froze on the stopwatch she carried. For one dizzying moment she wasn't here. She was there. Crawling on torn earth, dragging bodies through dust, ribs searing from shrapnel, taste of iron thick in her mouth. A recruit shouted, jolting her back. "Corporal Montgomery, one's bleeding out." Her knees buckled slightly, but she forced herself to move. She strode forward, voice sharper than she meant. "Tourniquet high and tight. Pressure, don't let go no matter what." The recruits scrambled, fumbling, their fear almost palpable even though the scene was staged. She corrected them, adjusted grips, barked commands until the chaos began to settle into controlled response. When the drill ended, sweat poured down her back, though the air wasn't that hot. She dismissed them, sending them to debrief. Alone on the field, she crouched by one of the mannequins. Its plastic arm was wrapped in a bandage, red dye seeping through. She touched it, her hand trembling. Her breath shuddered out of her. This was just training, but her body didn't know the difference. Her body remembered the real thing. That night, sleep didn't come. She lay in bed, sheets twisted, heart racing at every noise outside. In her mind, she was back in the convoy, the sudden eruption of fire and dust, the blast wave, the screaming, the smell of her own flesh burned by shrapnel. She sat up, gasping, clutching her side where the scar lived. She pressed her palm hard against it, as if pressure could stop the memory from bleeding. But it didn't. The next day she walked slower to the field. The recruits stood waiting, chattering softly, watching her. She wondered if they could see it, if they knew how fractured she felt inside. She forced her shoulders back, forced her voice steady. "Today we run it again, but faster." They groaned, but she ignored it. She couldn't let them see the crack. Halfway through the drill, one of the recruits, a tall kid from Ohio with freckles across his nose, muttered under his breath, not quietly enough. "Why should we listen to her? She's not even combat anymore." The words sliced. Riley froze, hearing them echo louder than the smoke grenades popping around her. She turned slowly, her voice low but edged with steel. "What did you say, recruit?" The boy stiffened, but pride pushed his chin up. "Just, you mop floors, you don't fight anymore." His voice wavered, but the damage was done. The others shifted uneasily, eyes darting between Riley and the boy. Riley stepped closer, boots crunching in the dirt. Her gaze locked on his, unwavering. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. "You think courage is holding a rifle. Courage is pulling your friend's body out of a kill zone with your own blood pouring down your side. Courage is saving lives while everything in you is screaming to hide. Don't you ever confuse a mop in my hand with weakness in my heart." The boy's face flushed. He looked down. The other recruits stood still, the air thick with tension. Riley held his gaze a moment longer, then turned back to the field. "Run it again. And this time you keep your mouth shut until you've earned the right to speak." The drill resumed. The recruits moved faster, sharper, silence replacing chatter. Riley's chest burned, not just from the confrontation but from the truth she had spoken aloud. She hadn't wanted to. She hadn't wanted to pull her ghosts into the open. But maybe they needed to hear it. Maybe she needed to hear it too. Later, when the recruits were gone, she sat on the edge of the training field, elbows on her knees, staring at the dirt. Found her there. His shadow stretched long in the late afternoon sun as he approached. "Heard about the kid," he said quietly. She didn't look up. Word travels fast. On a base, it always does. He lowered himself beside her, joints cracking. They sat in silence a while, the weight of the day pressing down. Finally said, "You handled it." "Did I?" she whispered. "Or did I just lose control?" He shook his head. "There's a difference between losing control and telling the truth. Don't confuse the two." She stared at the dirt, jaw tight. "I don't want to be defined by what I did in Afghanistan, but I don't want to be erased either, and right now it feels like I'm both." Nodded slowly. "That's the hardest part. The world wants simple stories, hero or nobody, fighter or failure, but we live in the middle. That's where the truth is, messy, complicated, real." His words sat heavy, sinking deep. She turned them over in her mind long after he left, long after the sun dipped behind the horizon and darkness crept across the base. That night she wrote again in her notebook. Her handwriting was uneven, the ink smudged where her hand shook. "Today, a kid saw me as nothing. I told him who I was. I don't know if he believed me, but maybe I needed to hear myself say it." She closed the book, but the thought lingered. Maybe teaching wasn't just about passing on skills. Maybe it was about reminding herself that her story wasn't over, that even in the face of whispers, disrespect, and silence, she could stand. Sleep came late again, but this time when the memories surged, she whispered to herself, steady and soft, "You're still here. You're still here." And slowly the ghosts faded into silence. Why did her hands still shake, even when no one was watching? The recruits hadn't noticed. They only saw the firm voice, the steady steps, the unflinching eyes of their instructor. But when the day ended, when the dust settled and the field was empty, Riley would sit on the edge of her bunk and stare at her hands. They trembled as though the battlefield had never let her go. Weeks had passed since the armory. Her life had changed in ways she never expected. She was no longer invisible, no longer just the woman with a mop. The recruits greeted her with respect now, some even with admiration. The whispers hadn't vanished completely, but they had dulled, pushed back by the weight of her presence and the authority she carried on the training field. Still inside, the war never left. One morning, the simulation drill was more chaotic than usual. Smoke grenades filled the air, dummies screamed through their speakers, and recruits stumbled in confusion. Riley barked orders, correcting their movements, driving them harder. She could see panic in their faces, and in her own mind, panic clawed its way forward. The smoke blurred into the thick dust of Afghanistan. The shouts blended with the screams of wounded Marines. Her body remembered the blast, the taste of blood. For one terrifying moment, she wasn't in camp. She was back on that road, shrapnel slicing her side, crawling toward a voice that begged not to be left behind. Her knees weakened. She gripped the railing at the edge of the field, steadying herself. No one noticed. The recruits were too absorbed in their drill. She forced herself to breathe, to ground herself in the present. The smell of synthetic smoke, not real fire. The cries from speakers, not dying men. She repeated it in her head until the haze broke. When the drill ended, she dismissed them quickly. Her voice was calm, but inside she felt broken open. She stumbled back to her quarters, shut the door, and sank against it, sliding to the floor. Her breaths came fast, shallow. Her hands clutched her ribs where the scar lived, the memory burning hotter than the wound itself. She whispered, barely audible, "You're still here, you're still here." But the words didn't calm her this time. They sounded hollow. That night she didn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the fourth Marine, the one she couldn't save. His face, his eyes, the way his blood seeped through her gloves, the way she had whispered promises he never lived to hear. She had saved 3, but one still haunted her. And in the dark of her barracks room, that one outweighed everything else. The next day, Captain called her in. He had heard reports her recruits were improving faster than expected. Her drills were brutal but effective. The medical scores had jumped. He congratulated her, his stern expression softening slightly. "You're making a difference, Montgomery. Don't underestimate that." She nodded, saluted, left his office. But the words didn't land the way he intended. Making a difference. Did that matter if she still felt like she was falling apart inside? Did it matter if the ghosts were louder than the recruits? Later found her again. He had a way of showing up when she was closest to unraveling. They sat outside near the motor pool, engines rumbling in the distance, night air cool against their faces. "You're somewhere else," he said quietly, not as a question but as a fact. She stared at the ground, jaw tight. "Hellman doesn't let me go. I tell myself I'm here, but sometimes," she trailed off, shaking her head. His eyes softened, though his voice stayed steady. "It never lets go. You just learn to live with the ghosts." Her throat tightened. "What if I can't?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at the horizon, where the lights of the base flickered against the dark. Finally, he said, "Then you lean on those who can carry the weight when you can't. That's what we're supposed to be, brothers and sisters, not silent bystanders." The words stung because they were true. She thought of the Armory again, the silence that had crushed her more than Davis's insults. She thought of the recruits, waiting for her to be unshakable. She thought of herself, alone in her barracks, whispering to ghosts. The next morning, the recruits gathered for another drill. Riley stood before them, exhaustion heavy in her bones. She looked at their young faces, their eagerness, their fear. She wanted to give them everything she wished someone had given her: truth, courage, the strength to face what war would do to them. But her voice caught when she began. One recruit noticed, the same boy who had once challenged her, the one who had questioned her worth. He raised his hand awkwardly. "Corporal, are you all right?" The words stunned her. For weeks, she had braced herself against his skepticism, his whispers. And now here he was asking, not with sarcasm, but with something closer to concern. She swallowed hard. "I'm fine, recruit," but her voice cracked. She hated it. Silence fell. The recruits looked at her, waiting. She could lie. She could push it down. She could pretend, as she always had. But something in her broke open. The weight was too much to carry alone anymore. She drew a breath, steady but heavy. "No, I'm not fine. None of us come back fine." The words spilled out, raw and unpolished. "War doesn't leave you. It follows you into your dreams, into your quiet moments, into the way your hands shake when no one's looking. You think training ends when the field is clear, but it doesn't. It never ends." The recruit stood still, silent, absorbing every word. Riley's chest rose and fell, her throat tight, but she kept going. "I teach you because I want you to survive. Not just on the battlefield, but after, when you're back here and the ghosts won't let you go. Remember this: courage isn't never being afraid. It's standing anyway, even when your knees are buckling, even when your hands won't stop shaking." Her eyes burned, but she didn't look away from them. "Don't forget that." Silence lingered. Then slowly, one of the recruits nodded. Another straightened his shoulders. The boy from Ohio looked at her differently, not as the woman with the mop, not even as the instructor, but as someone who had walked through hell and was still standing, but unbroken. For the first time, Riley felt something shift, not in whispers, not in rumors, but in their eyes. Respect. Real, lasting respect. That night she wrote in her notebook again. Her hand was steadier this time. Today I told them the truth, not the polished version, the real one. Maybe that's what they needed. Maybe that's what I needed too. She closed the book, exhaled, and lay back in her bunk. The ghosts would still come. She knew that. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel crushed by them. Tonight, she felt something closer to hope. Because sometimes courage isn't silence. Sometimes it's speaking, even when your voice shakes. Why did the air feel heavier whenever she walked into a room now? It wasn't just her recruits anymore. It was the officers, the senior staff, the men who had built careers on control, on order, on silence. They didn't say it outright, but Riley could feel it. The eyes that lingered too long, the clipped tones in meetings, the way her name surfaced in hushed conversations just outside earshot. She was making waves, and waves made people uncomfortable. Her recruits had changed. That was undeniable. They moved sharper now, spoke with more purpose. Their drills were smoother, their discipline. But it wasn't just skill, it was something deeper. They carried themselves differently, like they had absorbed not just her instructions but her resolve. Some of them even sought her out after hours, not for technical questions, but to ask the things no manual ever covered. "What do you do when you can't stop seeing it?" One asked late one evening, his voice low, almost ashamed. Riley didn't flinch. "You don't stop seeing it, you learn to live with it, and you don't do it alone." The boy nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. Word spread among them. Montgomery didn't just train their hands, she trained their hearts. And for young Marines staring down the uncertainty of deployment, that mattered more than they knew how to say. But not everyone saw it that way. One afternoon, Captain called her in again. His tone was different this time, more formal. He leaned across his desk, hands clasped. "Corporal, there's been feedback." Riley sat. "Feedback, sir." He exhaled slowly. "Some in command feel your approach is unconventional, that you're sharing too much of your personal battles, that it might weaken morale." The words struck like a cold wind. She clenched her jaw. "Weaken morale, sir. These recruits are stronger than ever. They're listening. They're learning." His gaze softened, if only slightly. "I know, I see it, but not everyone sees what I see. You're challenging the culture here, Montgomery. That makes people nervous." She swallowed, fighting the sting in her chest. "With respect, sir, maybe it's time the culture gets nervous." The words slipped out sharper than she intended, but she didn't regret them. Studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Careful, Corporal. The truth is heavy and not everyone wants to carry it." When she left his office, her pulse was racing. A part of her wanted to shrink back, to retreat into silence again. But another part, stronger now, refused. She had spent too long invisible. She wouldn't go back. That evening, as the recruits cleaned up after drills, Riley stayed behind. She sat on the bleachers, watching the sun dip low, painting the field in gold and shadow. Found her there, as he so often did. He lowered himself onto the bench beside her, silent for a while. "They're talking about you," he said finally. "I know." Her voice was quiet, steady. He tilted his head toward her. "And what are you going to do about it?" Riley exhaled, staring at the horizon. "I don't know. Part of me wants to stay quiet, easier that way. But if I do, what was the point of any of it? The armory, the recruits, the truth I told them. If I go back to silence, I erase myself all over again." Nodded slowly, as though her words confirmed something he already knew. "Then don't be silent." She turned to him, brow furrowed. "And what if it costs me?" His gaze held hers, unflinching. "Then at least you'll know you stood for something real. Not everyone can say that." His words lingered long after he left. She sat there until the field was swallowed in darkness, torn between fear and conviction. She had always known war demanded sacrifice. She hadn't expected the sacrifice would be her own peace, her own comfort, in the name of truth. The next day, during another training session, she made a choice. She gathered the recruits after the drill, their faces streaked with sweat and dust. She looked at them, not as students but as the future of the Corps. And she spoke. You've been told courage is running toward gunfire, that it's never showing fear, that it's always being strong, but that's not the whole truth. Courage is also admitting when you're broken. It's asking for help when the ghosts follow you home. It's speaking up when silence would be easier. Because silence kills. The recruits shifted, absorbing every word. Some nodded. Others swallowed hard, eyes darting to the ground as if she had spoken directly to wounds they hadn't yet confessed. Riley's throat tightened, but she pressed on. I know what it's like to be erased, to be told you don't matter, to be treated like you're less than what you've given. Don't let that happen to you. Don't let anyone take your story away from you. You've earned it. Hold it, speak it, even when your voice shakes. Silence followed, heavy but not empty. The recruits weren't just hearing her. They were carrying her words like weight in their packs, like ammunition they would one day draw on when the world tested them. Later that evening, as Riley walked through the base, she noticed something subtle but unmistakable. Marines nodded at her. Some greeted her with quiet respect. Others simply stepped aside, not dismissive, not indifferent, acknowledging. The shift was slow, but it was real. Not everyone approved. Whispers still circled, louder now in certain corners, but Riley no longer flinched at them. She had chosen, and with that choice came a new kind of strength. Back in her barracks, she opened her notebook. Her hand was steadier than it had been in weeks. Today, I spoke again. Not because it was safe, because it was necessary. Maybe the Corps doesn't want to hear it, but the Corps needs to hear it. And so do I. She closed the book and sat in the quiet. For once, the silence didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like a companion. She had filled it with her voice, her truth, and that truth echoed even now. But deep down, she knew this was not the end. Change never came without resistance. And somewhere in the shadows of camp, resistance was already stirring. Why did the summons feel like a sentence? Riley sat outside the command office, the hallway too quiet, her pulse too loud. The summons had come that morning, report at 900. No explanation, no details, just the clipped formality that carried the weight of authority. She knew what this was. The whispers had grown too loud. Her voice had carried too far. And now, the people who preferred silence wanted their turn to speak. She gripped the folder in her lap, the same one she carried when she taught recruits. Medical protocols, field notes, lesson outlines. Proof that she was doing her job and doing it well. But inside, she knew it wasn't about performance. It was about presence. About the fact that she refused to stay invisible. The door opened, Corporal Montgomery inside. The room was lined with flags and plaques, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and coffee gone cold. Behind the desk sat Colonel Hastings, a man known for his sharp tongue and sharper expectations. Stood to the side, arms folded, jaw tight. Riley snapped to attention, saluting. Corporal Hastings began, his voice clipped. Do you know why you're here? Riley held her posture. No, sir. His eyes narrowed. I've received reports about your methods, your choice of words with recruits, your decision to share personal struggles rather than maintain the image of strength this Corps depends on. Do you deny it? She hesitated just for a second, then, no, sir, I don't deny it. Hastings leaned back, steepling his fingers. Then you understand the problem. A Marine instructor should inspire confidence, not raise doubts, should build resilience, not sow weakness. Your role is to train, not to unburden yourself. Riley's chest burned, but her voice stayed calm. With respect, sir, I am building resilience, real resilience, not the kind that cracks the moment reality hits. I'm preparing them for what comes after the fight, not just during it. The colonel's lips thinned. "That's not your place, Corporal." Her jaw tightened. She thought of the recruits' faces, their questions, their whispered fears. She thought of the boy from Ohio who had once dismissed her, now hanging on her words like they mattered. She thought of her own nights, shaking in silence, wishing someone had spoken honestly to her. She met Hastings' gaze steady. "Then maybe it should be." The air went still. Eyes flicked toward her, warning, respect, something in between. Hastings' face hardened. "Watch your tone, Corporal. You're treading a fine line between duty and insubordination." Riley felt her pulse in her ears, but she didn't lower her eyes. "Sir, if telling the truth is insubordination, then maybe the line needs to be redrawn." For a long moment no one spoke. The weight of her words hung in the room like smoke. Finally, Hastings stood. His voice was low, measured, dangerous. "You've forgotten your place." Stepped in, his tone controlled but firm. "With respect, Colonel, she hasn't forgotten. She's reminding us of it. Her recruits' scores are higher than any unit we've seen this quarter. Whatever she's doing, it's working." Hastings turned on him. "At what cost? Discipline matters. Image matters. We are not here to air our scars like trophies." Riley's chest rose and fell. She almost stayed silent. Almost. But then she thought of the armory again, the silence that had crushed her while Davis tore her down. She couldn't live in that silence again. Her voice came out clear, steady. "Scars aren't trophies, sir. They're proof. Proof we survived, proof we gave something. Ignoring them doesn't make us stronger. It makes us weaker. And if I can keep one of these recruits from drowning in silence the way I almost did, then that's worth more than any polished image." The colonel's eyes blazed. "Enough." The word cut like a blade, but Riley didn't flinch. She had said what she needed to say. Hastings dismissed her with a sharp wave. "You'll be hearing from me soon, Corporal." She saluted, turned, and walked out. Her legs felt like lead, but her back stayed straight. Outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner, as though the walls had been suffocating her. Followed her into the hallway, his steps quick. "Montgomery." She turned. He studied her a moment, then said quietly, "That was dangerous, brave but dangerous." She swallowed. "I couldn't stay silent, sir." His jaw tightened, then slowly he nodded. "I know, and maybe you shouldn't." When he walked away, Riley leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. Her chest was heavy, but not with regret. Fear, yes. Uncertainty, yes, but not regret. She had spoken. She had refused to erase herself. Word spread quickly. By evening, the recruits knew. The whispers weren't about mops anymore. They were about defiance, about courage. Some looked at her with awe, others with worry, but all of them looked. She was no longer invisible. That night found her again, this time outside the Chow Hall, where the buzz of conversation followed them. He studied her face, reading the exhaustion there. "They came down on you, didn't they?" She nodded slightly. "Yeah." "And—" She met his gaze. "I stood my ground." A flicker of pride passed through his eyes. "Good, but you know what that means." She did. The fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. Later in her room, she opened her notebook again. Her pen pressed harder this time, words scrawled deep into the page. "Today I told them the truth again. Not just the recruits. The ones who sit in offices, the ones who prefer silence. They didn't want to hear it, but I said it anyway. If it costs me, then it costs me. But at least I'll know I stood for something real." She set the pen down, staring at the page until the ink blurred. The silence around her was thick, but it didn't crush her this time. She had filled it with her voice. Still, as she lay down, a question haunted her. How much could one voice change? Could it shift a culture, or would it simply be swallowed by the machinery of tradition and pride? She didn't know. But she knew this: she wouldn't go back to silence. And in the quiet of her room, that resolve felt like its own kind of victory. Why did the base feel different now? It wasn't the buildings. They stood the same, steel and concrete under the September sun. It wasn't the routines either. Boots still marched, engines still roared, flags still snapped in the wind. No, the difference was subtler. It lived in the way people looked at her now. Not everyone, not always, but enough. Enough to remind her that invisibility wasn't permanent. Riley Montgomery was no longer just the woman with a mop. She was the Marine who spoke when silence weighed heavier than bullets. But recognition is never clean. Alongside the nods of respect came shadows of resistance. Colonel Hastings hadn't forgotten their confrontation. Rumors swirled, words like insubordination, reassignment, transfer. She didn't know which were true, but she felt the pressure building. Every morning, she woke with the weight of uncertainty pressing on her chest. Would today be the day they stripped her role away? Still she taught, still she showed up. Her recruits grew sharper by the week. They no longer fumbled in simulations. Their hands moved with confidence, their eyes steadier under smoke and chaos. But more than skill, Riley saw something else: resilience. They carried themselves differently now, as though her words had rooted deep. When drills ended, some lingered, asking questions not just about medicine, but about survival, the kind that had nothing to do with bandages and everything to do with scars. One evening, after a brutal exercise, the boy from Ohio approached her, the same one who had once mocked her. His voice was quieter now. "Corporal, I just wanted to say I was wrong. About you." Riley studied him, his freckles dark with sweat, his eyes sincere. For a moment she saw herself in him, young, eager, desperate to prove, too proud to admit fear. She let the silence linger, then nodded. "Don't be wrong about yourself, recruit. That's what matters." He straightened, shoulders squared. The respect in his gaze was real, not because she demanded it, because she had earned it. But outside the training field, tension tightened like wire. Hastings called her in again, this time with present, the atmosphere colder. "Corporal Montgomery," Hastings began, his tone clipped, "your methods have drawn attention beyond this base. Some commend you, others question whether you undermine discipline. This cannot continue unchecked." Riley stood at attention, her heart pounding. She thought of her recruits, of the boy from Ohio, of the late-night questions whispered like confessions. She thought of who had told her not to be silent. And she thought of the mop, the Purple Heart in her pocket, Davis's sneer echoing in her memory. She would not go back. "With respect, sir," she said, her voice steady, "discipline without humanity isn't strength. It's fragility. What I teach doesn't weaken Marines, it makes them unbreakable. Because they learn to carry their scars, not hide from them." Hastings' jaw clenched. "You speak as though you know better than the Corps itself." Riley's throat tightened, but she met his eyes. "No, sir, I speak because I love the Corps enough to want it better." The silence that followed was suffocating. His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes flickered with something, a trace of pride perhaps. Hastings dismissed her with a sharp gesture. No verdict, no resolution, just more waiting. Outside, Riley's knees almost buckled. She walked until she found herself at the Armory again, standing in the same spot where it had all begun. The floor still shone. The racks still glinted under fluorescent light. But the weight in the air was different now. She wasn't invisible anymore. She had left something here that no one could erase. Appeared beside her as though summoned by memory itself. He didn't speak at first. He just stood, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room like it held ghosts of its own. Finally, he said, "You know they might move you. Shut this down." "I know," her voice was quiet. "And you're not afraid." She exhaled, long and heavy. "I'm terrified, but I'm more afraid of silence, of going back to erasing myself." Nodded slowly, as though she had passed another test he hadn't announced. "Then whatever happens, you've already won." That night she wrote in her notebook again. The words came easier this time, flowing steady across the page. "They may silence my role, they may move me, but they cannot erase what I've already spoken. They cannot take back the respect I've earned, the recruits I've trained, the truths I've told. Silence isn't victory, speaking is." Days passed, weeks. The uncertainty stretched, but no orders came. Instead, something unexpected happened. Senior leadership above Hastings began reviewing training reports. The numbers were undeniable: higher survival scores, sharper recruits, improved cohesion. They sent quiet inquiries, not about punishment but about replication. What is Montgomery doing that works so well? Hastings' resistance weakened under the weight of proof. Never said it outright, but Riley sensed he had fought for her behind closed doors. One morning he called her in again. This time his tone was softer. "Corporal, leadership has decided to expand your methods. They're asking you to document your training process for other units." Her chest tightened. She blinked, unsure. "Sir, are you saying?" He allowed the smallest of smiles. "I'm saying your voice carried further than you know, and it's not being silenced." Relief hit her like a wave. Not triumph. She didn't feel triumphant. Just a quiet, steady exhale, as though she had been holding her breath for months. That evening, she gathered her recruits one last time before they rotated into their next phase of training. They stood taller now, stronger, more aware. She looked at them, her voice steady but soft. "You'll go on from here. Some of you will deploy. Some of you will face what I've faced. Remember this: you are more than your rank, more than your rifle, more than your scars. Don't let anyone erase what you've given. Don't let silence define you." Their faces were solemn, absorbing every word. She dismissed them, and as they marched away, she felt something settle in her chest. Not peace, not yet, but purpose. Later, alone in her room, she held the Purple Heart citation again. She ran her fingers over the creased paper, remembering the day she had shoved it into her pocket before Davis had tried to erase her. She whispered into the quiet, "You didn't erase me. You reminded me." And maybe that was the truth she had been chasing all along. The Armory moment wasn't just humiliation. It wasn't just rescue. It was rebirth. It had forced her to confront silence, to choose whether she would live unseen or speak. And she had spoken. As she turned off the light, her notebook open on the nightstand, the last words she had written glowed faintly in the moonlight. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts." Riley Montgomery closed her eyes. The ghosts would still come. The scars would always remain. But now she carried them differently, not as weights but as reminders. Reminders that even silence can be broken. And in the stillness of the night, her heart beat steady with one unshakable truth: she was still a Marine.